So the golden question is, would I buy the K1C again? Hey, welcome back. I hope everybody is doing fantastic. This week we are going to be taking a look at the Creality K1C. This is the newest 3D printer that I bought, and we're going to review it. A couple of weeks ago, we unboxed this Creality K1C alongside cameraman Beau's new Bambu P1S on a live stream. And the intent of purchasing both of these machines at the same time was they're really similar machines. The Creality K1 lineup came out after the Bambu series of printers, the X1 and the P1 series. And the design language that Creality was going for with this 220 by 220 by 250 millimeter CoreXY machine was, well, very heavily inspired by the styling of Bambu Lab. There's only so much that you can do when it comes to the design of a CoreXY machine, but Creality did give their own flavor to it, but you can see where some inspiration is drawn. Personally, I really enjoy the look and the aesthetic of this machine, and I think it would look great in just about any environment. However, the inspiration is still there, and that's why we wanted to compare the two machines side by side. In addition to making content with it, I had a couple of other reasons why I purchased a K1C instead of just buying another Bambu Lab printer. Primarily, since the Bambu P1S was initially announced, the upgrade kit to basically turn my P1P into a P1S has been perpetually out of stock. And anytime that it comes back in stock, it sells out like that. And it drives me insane. I really wanted to make that machine enclosed and it not have that DIY feel. I wanted a professional looking enclosed printer that I knew that I could trust and count on. So instead of spending $153 with Bambu Lab, I chose to spend $600 on the K1C. Full disclosure, I did actually purchase this printer with my own money with the intent of creating content and actually using it in my day-to-day operations. And unlike previous review video attempts that we've made, I did actually watch some content on this machine after I received it, and we'll talk a little bit about why as we get into the video. And I've actually spoken to a couple of other content creators about their experiences with their K1C, and it doesn't exactly create a bubble when you're looking at the scope of a review, but I feel as though I'm more inclined to want to like a machine if I'm paying for it, and the confirmation bias is real. Typically, people do want to like something that they spent their money on way more, unless of course they're being paid to like something, but that's another story for another day. The reality of the situation is, I bought this machine and I'm going to give you my honest feedback on it. There are some things that I think are absolutely fantastic, there are some things that I don't really love, and there are some things that I downright can't stand about the K1C. We're going to start with the good, we're going to go to the bad, and then we're going to dive into the ugly. Starting with the good, I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think this machine looks fantastic. It looks like it's a finished piece of furniture, it's appliance ready, and it's ready to be in your home. That is a huge deal, especially when you're spending a premium price tag on a 3D printer. I mean, I would consider anything above the $350 range to be more mid-range, but it's definitely not entry level anymore. And for that, you are going to want a machine that has a good fit and finish. And on the outside, from the transparent walls, the actually glass door, touchscreen, and the back panel, which you're seeing right now, I do believe that this machine looks amazing. My experience with the user interface on this machine was also pretty good. The touchscreen I find to be incredibly responsive, and that's a huge deal. If you're going to put a touchscreen on a 3D printer, make it a good one. When it comes to getting into the machine, the hinges are really smooth. They're not super fast opening. And the front glass panel lets you see what you're working on really easily. Especially when you have the LED light that's inside of the machine turned on, you have pretty decent visibility. One of the awesome things with the K1C is it's an upgrade from the original K1 machine, so it actually includes the webcam in it by default. So you can run time lapses on this machine and get some pretty decent results. It's not a great webcam, but they included it, which will also function for some web monitoring. And that's becoming more and more important as time goes on. 3D printing companies are starting to raise the bar on what's included as a standard feature, and I think we're reaching the point where a webcam or easy webcam access is starting to become something that is a standard feature, and Creality rose to the occasion. When it comes to actually printing, you're going to have a nozzle wiper on the back of your build plate. And that's kind of a pro-con. The build plate is pretty decent, but the one that's included with the machine says it's for PLA only and to use glue stick. And boy, did I liberally use glue stick on this thing. You will find, however, that the nozzle wiper that's integrated with this machine is actually adhered to the build plate, which I thought was kind of a confusing motivation. It seems like Creality is kind of trying to lock you into using their build plates because they're sticking these silicone scrapers on there, and that's just an interesting move. There are plenty of other companies like Bambu Lab and Anycubic who are utilizing scrapers of some sort on their machines, and it's not restricting use of the build plate. Being said, I'm sure the third-party build plate companies are going to catch on. Third-party accessory companies are probably going to start selling those scrapers. This machine is still very new. At the time that I ordered it on Amazon, it wasn't even supposed to be shipping from the Creality web store yet. So I actually got my machine and opened it before a lot of users were even starting to get tracking notices. Something that I do genuinely love about the K1C is that it actually runs Klipper firmware. And for those of you who don't know, maybe you're new to 3D printing and you're considering purchasing this for your first machine, Klipper is a open source 3D printing firmware that is incredibly customizable and very easy to access within a web browser. And you can do all sorts of fun and crazy things. That's what all of the Voron series of machines are typically running. And you can put it on pretty much any machine you want. The ease of control you have over the firmware is just absolutely mind-boggling, and members of the community are putting a ton of work into making Klipper better and better and better. And unlike some firmwares that we had in the past, you don't have to be a coding expert to make changes to your printer parameters in the firmware. It's pretty straightforward, and there are a ton of great guides available. There are written guides on different GitHub repositories. There are amazing content creators like 3DP Nero, the Canuck creator, Michael Laws over at Teaching Tech. Both of those creators have done some really awesome videos about Klipper and implementation, and I highly suggest you check their channels out. I personally am using Klipper on a few of my machines, including my Voron 0.2 from FISEC, and the customizability of running Klipper is amazing. And I genuinely enjoy the user interface and the web interface. However, Creality locked down the Klipper implementation that they gave you. But we'll touch on Creality's locking down of Klipper a little bit later in the video as well. The C in K1C stands for carbon. And that's because Creality is saying that this machine is designed to 3D print abrasive and carbon-filled filaments right out of the gate. So of course we tested it. The LTT screwdriver case that I made, which does look pretty good aside from a few issues, is made with some beautiful dark blue carbon fiber PETG. And the print turned out dimensionally accurate. Everything is where it should be. However, you're going to notice that the top and bottom layers don't necessarily look the greatest or the cleanest, and that's a result of the build plate on this machine. The build plate that they included requires the use of glue stick, like I said, and it tends to leave the ghost of a previous print that's left over in the glue stick. And I might have gone a little bit heavy-handed with it, but I was trying to ensure that I didn't destroy a build plate that I can't replace just yet. As a result, you can see the remnants or just the outlines of previous prints on the bottom layers of everything that I print after that. And sure, maybe a lighter glue stick application would make some of that go away, but it seems like it's still going to be there as it continues to heat up and you build up some glue stick over time, maybe you're touching things up. But one thing that I really want to point out with this case, there are lines, there are vertical lines going straight up and down on all of the flat sidewalls. Those are vertical artifacts, VFAs, and there are tests that you can run in Orca Slicer, which is my slicer of choice these days, to check for those. Basically, you can identify what range your machine is going to be printing at and see how bad the VFAs are. And Creality got a lot of feedback on the original K1 machines about these VFAs, and they were supposed to, my knowledge, have been addressed with the K1C. Unfortunately, what you're seeing they have not been addressed. And as we look at some more prints, you're going to see that continuing to be a common theme. Since they give you the hardened steel nozzle out of the gate, of course I had to test this carbon fiber filled material. It was actually my first experience printing with a carbon fiber filled filament. And aside from the artifacts on my print, I couldn't have been happier. The surfaces, oh my gosh, do they look great. The layer lines are practically invisible, and I'm definitely going to use a lot more of that filament. And one of the main advantages why you would want to print a carbon fiber filled material is it's going to increase the rigidity. It's going to make the filament more stiff. And that's going to be really useful on a material like PETG, which is easier to print than something like ABS or ASA because it doesn't require an enclosure. And it is a little bit more flexible, so if you can increase the rigidity while still having the thermal resistance that you get with ABS and ASA, perhaps to a lesser degree, but it's still there, I would say that that's going to be an absolute win. So definitely going to be printing more CF-PETG in the future. Speaking of ABS and ASA, if you couldn't tell, the K1C does come fully enclosed from the factory, including a top hat, which is going to help keep all the heat enclosed in the printer, which makes printing materials like ABS, ASA, polycarbonate significantly easier. And for a machine with a claimed print speed of 600 millimeters per second, the fact that they included an auxiliary part cooling fan by default is an incredibly nice touch. Not every material that you print is going to need it. In fact, most materials, unless you're printing at absolutely insane speeds and you have it tuned in incredibly well, you probably won't be able to take advantage of most of that part cooling. In fact, PLA prints with the top hat open and the part cooling fan going at max speed could potentially be prone to warping because of the amount of airflow flowing over the print and it cooling down too quickly. But that's something that you have to kind of experiment with and try and see what works best for you and the individual materials that you're using. So in this beautifully designed package, you get a lot of features. You can use the machine with the web. Creality has their own slicer, which is a fork of Cura, which has been streamlined in terms of operation and interacting with the machine. And you get some parts that would be upgrades for others, like the hardened steel nozzle, the auxiliary part cooling fan, LED lights inside the enclosure, a really nice functioning touchscreen. So that was the good. What about the bad? What exactly isn't so great about the K1C? Well, unfortunately, in my experience, it's the print quality. The print quality is the first thing that comes to mind when I think of what's not so great with the K1C. And I'm really reluctant to call out print quality specifically because so much of that is controlled by tuning and actually doing test prints. However, regardless of the different profiles that I tried, I did do some prints in Creality Slicer before I set the machine up in Orca Slicer. I just am not super thrilled with the print quality that I'm getting from this machine. I mentioned a minute ago that the K1 lineup has suffered from these vertical artifacts, and that's incredibly apparent on a lot of the things that I printed. One thing that I did to try to combat that is actually to properly implement Input Shaper. See, Creality's implementation of Klipper firmware is incredibly locked down. The web interface that you have access to, you don't really get access to all of the same settings and tuning parameters that you would get by running mainline Klipper. So I actually rooted this machine. And if you remember jailbreaking your iPod Touch back in 2013, it's kind of a similar process. Basically, you go in and you're unlocking a bunch of settings and then you're installing all of the mainline Klipper things that make Klipper a really great firmware to use. And I was apprehensive about doing that, not because I was afraid of messing up my machine, but because I was afraid that by doing that during the middle of a review, I was going to skew my results. However, the absolute final nail in the coffin was when I printed this Gridfinity box out of Polylite ABS. And I know that this Polylite ABS is a phenomenal material because I have absolutely knocked out some amazing prints with this exact same spool on my Voron. But the K1 just failed to deliver. There's these weird extrusion artifacts and the print looks terrible. It's still functional and I'm still going to use it because I don't want to waste the material and I went through the aggravation of slicing and printing it, but I'm not happy with it. And for a machine that I spent $600 on, I want to be happy with it. So I rooted the machine. I installed all of the things that make Klipper fun. And a few of the users from the original K1 reported that Creality's implementation of input shaper is done incorrectly. The reason that's a relevant thing is input shaper basically helps to smooth out ringing and ghosting and helps make your parts look better by kind of setting some maximum speed parameters with your machine. It's kind of a really oversimplified way to explain what it does. Just know that your printer needs an accelerometer, move some stuff around really fast, and make sure there's no shakiness on your print. Well, when Creality implemented Input Shaper on the K1 series of machines, basically when it runs the x-axis value and the y-axis value, it's only storing one of those numbers and reusing it for both axes. And that's not right because they're moving in different ways. There's different speeds that it's going to be moving. You're going to have different resonances on your x-axis versus your y-axis because your y-axis on a CoreXY machine is going to be moving your x-axis and your tool head, not just your tool head. So I fixed that and I decided that I wanted to print an Orca calibration cube, and that's straight out of Orca Slicer. I actually used some KVP, which is a local filament company to me, blue ABS, and I've printed some Voron parts with that turned out phenomenal, and I'm fairly happy with it. But even after tuning the input shaper and fixing it, there's still ringing, there's still ghosting, and there's still vertical artifacting. So at this point I'm scratching my head. Why is this machine not printing well? I just couldn't get it. I tried flow tuning, didn't do it. So I've tried other users' profiles and Orca Slicer. I've tried Creality Slicer, which is their fork of Cura, and I'm just not thrilled. But I wanted to persevere. I wanted to like this machine because I've heard of so many users who had good experiences with a K1 or K1 Max, and I wanted to be one of those users, especially when I spent my money on this thing. So that is where Darth Vader comes in. The Darth Vader bust that you can see was printed in the exact same Polylite ABS that I printed my Gridfinity box in. And I've pulled Ender 3s out of the box with no tuning and no calibration that printed better than that does. These bands appeared, which we associate in our minds with Z-banding. Typically, it's an extrusion issue. Maybe there's a problem with the extruder in my machine. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% on what the issue is because while I was frustrated with how that printed, I wanted to give this machine every fighting chance that I could to stay in the workshop. If it's not going to print carbon fiber PETG great, and it's not going to print ABS great, maybe it can at least do PLA really well. That's where Blue Vader comes into play. I printed this Blue Vader using the exact same model and the exact same positioning. The only difference is the blue one is printed out of New Maker's PLA. And in our live stream, we printed these little pen caps that make your pen look like a great sword. And the K1C did a great job with this New Maker's blue. So I knew it was capable of printing this filament really well. Well, the Z-banding issue is super persistent and it's very apparent on this model. So everything that I threw at it after the tuning and calibration, it just wasn't up to par. And I have spent some more time reading and talking with individuals about improving the print quality of this machine, but I wasn't happy at this point. Which leads me to the downright ugly. What is happening with this machine that makes me very unhappy? Well, it's not the tolerances, because I printed this tolerance test and man, it killed that too. It's capable of tolerances all the way down to 0.1 millimeters with minimal tuning. And I was really impressed with that. That means that all of your fun print and place models are going to work, including a fidget spinner bearing. This helical gear bearing is not exactly a difficult print, but it does require your tolerances, your flow, and your retraction to be absolutely on point. And I've been carrying this bearing spinner around in my pocket for some time, and it works really well. There are some other things that Creality did with this machine that I just don't love, starting with the door. When you're printing material in an enclosure, particularly something that is very warp prone, like ABS, you want your chamber temperature to be as consistent as possible. On the door of the K1 machines, Creality has left a gap. You see on the screen here, there is a cutout in the glass to move around the screen. They sacrificed functionality for form. And during my test printing, I was not able to get the chamber temperature using the thermistor, which you can see here, built into the machine to register over 35 degrees Celsius. when I'm done with an ABS print on my Voron V0, granted it's a smaller volume of air, the V0 is finishing prints with a chamber temperature of around 50 degrees Celsius. It gets hot in there, which is an ideal environment for printing ABS and other engineering grade materials because you're lowering the speed in which these materials are cooling. And that's going to relieve the stress inside the model from the filament being laid down, which is going to reduce your chance of warping. Well, this giant opening in the front of this machine makes that really hard to do. And it is filtered. There is a carbon filter built into the machine. You just stick it on the back over top of the exhaust fan. Well, looking at this clip, the carbon filter is very see-through. This like honeycomb hexagon pattern has some carbon pellets in it, and it probably reduced some VOCs. However, when this machine is printing ABS, I can still smell it really strong, regardless of how far away in the room I am. It is filling my room with the smell of ABS plastic. So if you're going to include a filter, at least let it filter. There's no HEPA screen on there catching additional particulates, just those little tiny granules. And I'm sure that there are going to be some people in the community who do come up with something to help filter the air a little bit better, but I don't think that Creality answered the call with that. All in all, I don't think that the filter they're providing you for your air quality is really doing a whole lot. Sure, it's probably helping some, but it is not exactly what I would consider to be confidence inspiring. While we're still on the back of the machine, they do give you a filament runout sensor on the back of the machine. The K1 has a rear mounted spool holder. And on these cube-shaped CoreXY machines, I personally, and many others, find these rear-mounted spool holders to be quite a hassle because you typically are going to want this machine to be pressed as far back against the wall as possible to maximize your workspace. Well, you can't do that, much like you can't on the Bambu series of machines without printing mods for it. Being said, I do greatly prefer Creality's implementation of the spool holder to Bambu's because it's just a simple twist into place, as you can see on the screen. It doesn't actually require any tools to mount it, which I do find to be a pretty big plus with this machine. And the last thing is Creality print. We need to talk about that. So their Creality print slicer, Creality slicer, whatever they're calling it, is one of the main ways that they want you to actually utilize this machine. And admittedly, the slicer is decent because it's built off of Cura. And that's where one of the biggest glaring issues that I noticed with their locking down of Klipper came in. The only place with a machine running Klipper you can get your time lapses are directly in Creality print. You can't get them if you visit the printer's IP address in the web browser like you would with normal Klipper, and that is frustrating. I personally like to add the IP address of my 3D printers into Orca Slicer and use them directly there. And if you root this machine and give yourself full Klipper access and install either mainsail or fluid as your front end access point, you can get your time lapses there. But as this machine ships out of the box, if you want to pull the time lapses using the internet, you have to use Creality's software. And that is a huge frustration for me. So the golden question is, would I buy the K1C again? No. Personally, I would not purchase another K1C. In fact, I struggled with this decision for quite some time, and I've only done this with one machine in the past that I didn't love. But I have decided that I'm actually going to be returning my K1C. And I don't make that decision lightly. From some past experiences with different machines, some of the issues that I'm seeing on my prints go beyond tuning issues. They go full-blown into hardware difficulties. I bought the K1C because it was supposed to be poised as a direct competitor to Bambu Lab, both in terms of functionality and style. And when you look at the $559 price tag, you can spend $140 more and get a Bambu P1S. And you're going to have pretty much every single feature, but it's a proven platform. I've been using my P1P to great success for a long time. Cameraman Beau has printed enough parts to make a whole Voron in the amount of time that I've been struggling with my K1. And the reality of the situation is, when you are selling a product that is supposed to be aimed as a set it and forget it kind of thing, and you fail to deliver on that, you're going to disappoint your customers. And as somebody who's purchased more than my fair share of Creality machines, I'm a disappointed customer. And in good conscience, I can't recommend that any of you buy this machine. If you want to, I don't blame you, because the promise is there, and there's a strong possibility that I might have just gotten a bad unit. There might have been some damage to mine. But I do know some other creators who are sending theirs back too for similar issues. In our last video, we talked about the importance of saving up a few extra dollars to buy the machine that you really want to buy. And if you're torn between the K1C and a P1S, well, the P1S is going to give you a larger build volume, and I personally have had great success with the entire Bambu ecosystem. So for what my experiences are worth, I wanted to pass those along and share them. So in summary, I think that there are a lot of things going well with this machine from a design and physical aesthetic perspective. But when you spend this kind of money on a machine that doesn't come with a spare print bed, and it's a proprietary style print bed that you can't buy spares of yet, and they include a new type of nozzle, which you can't buy spares of from Creality yet, at least as of the time of filming, those are things that are issues for me. I say this begrudgingly. By the time this video goes live, my K1C is going to be returned to Amazon, and I'm going to have my money back in my pocket. I'm going to keep my eye out. I've always enjoyed my Creality machines. I've gotten some great prints. My experience has not been that, and I just don't feel comfortable recommending it. Unfortunately, it's not for me.